Okay, so we are on the Gemara towards the bottom of Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, the last 3 lines. The Gemara today begins with the 3 malachas of the Mishnah: Hazoire, Habayrer, V'Hatoichen, V'Hamerakid. So what are they? Zoire is the winnowing. Person throws up the kernels and the husk the falls on one side and the kernels fall on another side. Bayrer is selecting with your hands the edible, the food that's not edible from the food which is edible. V'Hatoichen is grinding. Hamerakid is sifting. So the Gemara has the following question: Hainu Zaira, Hainu Bayra, Hainu Merakid. These 3 malachas seem to be the same exact point. What the person is doing is he's separating what's not edible from what is edible. One is through the winnowing, one is through selecting by hand, and one is through sifting. But they're all 3 basically the same thing. So why do we divide them into 3 separate malachas? Abai and Rava both explain, Kol milsa the havya b'mishkan. Whatever was done in the Mishkan, afagav the ikke the damyula, even if there are 2 things that are similar, they're accomplishing the same thing, chashivla. It's counted as a separate malacha. So same as here, these 3, although they accomplish the same thing, they were all 3 done in the Mishkan, and they're counted as 3 separate malachas. Now, Tosfos here clarifies, this doesn't mean that if you have 2 identical actions, 2 identical malachas, and they were both in the Mishkan, they'll be counted separately. Tosfos brings examples where that's not the case. Obviously, if it's identical, even if it was both in the Mishkan, it won't be counted separate. Rather, what the Gemara here means is, the fact is that winnowing, selecting by hand, or sifting are not the exact same action. They accomplish the same thing, but it's a different kind of an action and a different stage of the preparation of the food. So therefore, because it's doing it in a different way, although it accomplishes the same thing, it was in the Mishkan in each separate stage that it was done, so therefore it's counted separately. Why don't we also include another stage in preparing the grain to be able to be made into bread, which is kaitish, pounding the kernels to remove yet another layer of husk that is not going to be part of the flour if you want to have really nice white flour. So Abaye answers, a poor person eats his bread and makes it from flour without pounding, removing yet this other layer of husk. So therefore, it's not something which is completely necessary in the process, therefore the Tana didn't count it. Although it is an av malacha. Kaitish, as Rashi here says, will be part of dosh, it'll be part of threshing, but it's not counted separately because it's not something that everybody does. Rava gives a different answer why kaitish is not counted. Hamani Rebbe. Our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rebbe, the Omar of his malachas are boim chasarachas, that the Ovis malachas and Shabbos are 39, not more than 39. V'chashiv kaitish, if you're going to count this pounding as well, havile arboim, then you're going to have 40. And we know that it's only 39, as we learned out from the Psukim before. Eila hadvarim, there's only 39. Asks the Gemara, how is this an adequate answer? Maybe remove one of the ones mentioned before, Zaira, Bayrer, and Merakid, maybe one of those should be removed, and maybe Kaitish should be inserted instead, and you'll still have 39. Ela machvarte kedabaya. The best answer is like Abaye said, that Kaitish is not a necessary part of the process. Poor people do without it, and therefore that is removed. However, Zaire, Bayrer, and Merakid, these are all necessary things that people do, and therefore it is included as it was in the Mishkan. Now the next Amud of the Gemara here, we will be discussing and focusing the malacha of Bayrer. Tana Rabbanan, we learned the following in a Braisa. A person has kinds of foods in front of him. Bayrer v'eichel, he may select the bad from the good and eat it. And he may select and also leave it for others to eat. But then the Braisa says, one should not select on Shabbos. And if he did, chayev chatos, is chayev a korban chatos. My ka'amar. Now, so the Gemara asks, what's the pshat on this Braisa? There's an obvious contradiction here. The statements of the Braisa don't make sense. It begins saying you're allowed, then it says you're not allowed, and if you do, you're chayev chatos. So the Gemara will bring many different pshatim here in this Braisa. Omar Ula, the first pshat, Ula said, Hochi ka Omar, this is how you learn the Braisa. You're allowed to do the bayrer, the malacha of bayrer, if it's for that day. Bayrer maniach, you can be bayrer to leave it for someone else to eat for that day, for Shabbos. Ulamachar, but if you're selecting the food that's not edible from the food that is, for the purpose of eating it tomorrow, lo yivrei. For that, you're not allowed. For that purpose, it's not allowed. Ve'im birer, and if you did, chayav chatas. You'll be chayav chatas. Maskef lo Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda asked on this pshat of ulam, v'chi muter lefois lebay bayayim. Is one allowed to bake on Shabbos? He's doing a malacha of baking as long as it's for the purpose of eating it on the, on the day of Shabbos. Is that allowed? Is one allowed to cook if it's for the purpose of eating on Shabbos itself? Of course not. What difference does it make if the malacha is being done for the purpose of eating or drinking on Shabbos itself? It's not allowed. So why would it be different regarding bayrer? If he's doing the malacha of bayrer for the purpose to eat on Shabbos itself, that would be allowed. So he doesn't accept Ula's pshat. Rather Rav Chisda says the pshat would be as follows: bayrer va'oichel pachas mikashir. The first half of the brayso is saying you're allowed to be bayrer if it's less than the shear. When it comes to the malachas of Shabbos, the shear always is a kegroigeris, as Rashi here says, the size of a fig. So if it's more than the shear, so then it's if it's less than the shear, that is, then it's allowed. Less than the shear is also allowed for leaving it for someone else to eat. Or kashir, but if you're selecting the malacha of bayrer and it's the shear, then lo yivrer, then it's not allowed. Ve'im birer, and if you did b'sheigik chayav chatas, you'd be chayav chatas. Maskef lo Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef asks on this pshat of Rav Chisda, v'chi muter lefais pachas mikashir. Are you allowed to bake less than a shear? We know that regarding all the malachas, and in fact all isurim, where there are shiurim for the amount of the iser, but chatzi shear, a half a shear, is also forbidden. As Rashi here brings the source in the Gemara in Yuma, the Torah asks also the half a shear. So how could we say that if it's a half a shear, then it's allowed? Elam Rav Yosef. So rather, Rav Yosef says the pshat would be a third pshat he presents here. Bayrer v'oichel biyad. You're allowed to do the malacha of bayrer, selecting if it's done by hand. Bayrer meniach biyad, you're allowed to do it by hand and leave it for somebody else to eat. Being done by hand is not the way the malacha of bayrer is usually done, and that's totally allowed. Bekinun ubetamchoy, if it's being done with a kinun, which is a kind of a funnel that can be used for this purpose. It's not designated usually for doing this, but if you use a funnel for this, or a tamchoy, a large plate where you spread out the foods on it, or the beans, or whatever it is, to be able to select the inedible foods of the edible, then lo yivre. In such a way, you're using a kind of a vessel for this, you're not allowed. But ve'im birer, using either a kinun and a tamchoy, if you did it this way, potter, you would still be potter, because this is still not the regular keli designated for this. Avalasa, but it's forbidden if it's not done by hand. Ubenafo bekivra, if you are doing it with kinds of sifters that are designated and used for this, lo yivra, then you're not allowed to do the malacha of bayrer. Ve'im birer chayav chatas, and if you did, you're using the keli that's designated for this malacha, then you'd be chayav chatas. That's the pshat on the brayso. So there's a difference if you're doing it by hand or if you're doing it with a keli. And when the brayso says yechayiv, is if you're doing it with the designated keli for this malacha, then you're chayav chatas. So fragt the Gemara, Maskef lo Rav Amnuna. Rav Amnuna asks the question, Midi kinon v'tamchi katani? Does it say this clearly in the brayso? Does the brayso spell out the difference between the reisha and the sefer being by hand or with a vessel? It doesn't say this in the brayso. So notice Rav Amnuna is not arguing with the concept that Rav Yosef said. He's just arguing with the way he explained the brayso, because it wasn't explicitly mentioned in the brayso. Right? Previously, the Gemara was questioning the very concept. How could you say that it would be permitted if it's for that day? How could you say that it's permitted if it's a half a shear? Here, the question of Ramnuna is that in the words of the brayso, kilin and tamche don't appear. Elam Rav Amnuna, so therefore, for the pshat of the brayso, Rav Amnuna says, Bayrer v'oichel mitoich hapsailis, bayrer umeniach oichel mitoich hapsailis. You're allowed to select what's edible from what's not edible, whether for yourself, whether to leave it for someone else to eat. The only problem with beirer is if you're taking the pseiles, what's not edible, from what is edible. That is the derech of how you're usually beirer. If you do it the other way around, you're selecting the food, then it's allowed. Pseiles mitay chaychol, if it's the unedible from the edible, then lo yivre. That's not allowed. Vim birer chayev chatas. And if you did, you'd be chayev a chatas. Maskefla Abaye. So Abaye again asks a similar question that Rav Amnuna asked. Midi oichel mitoich pseiles ketani. Does it say in the Braise that the difference over here is specifically if it's food, if it's edible from what's not edible? We don't see this distinction in the Braise itself. So again, he's not disagreeing with the premise of what he said, but he's asking that in the Lashon of the Braise we can't see this. Elamar Abaye, so rather Abaye says, a third pshat, Beirer v'oichel la'alter. You're allowed to select the food if you're eating it immediately. Beirer u'miniach la'alter. Select the food for someone else to eat it immediately. Ulabay bayayin, if you're selecting the food and it's going to be eaten later in the day on Shabbos, lo yivre. For that purpose, you're not allowed to do the beirer. V'im birer, and if you did, nase kebeirer la'oitzer. This is like an individual that's doing the selecting to go and store it, not for eating, v'chayev chatas, and you'll be chayev a chatas. So when you select for the purpose of eating immediately, that's not the derech of beirer, that you're doing it as a derech achila, you're eating it. Or if you're selecting it for later in the day, even if you're planning on eating it later in the day, but it's as if you selected it to put it away in a storehouse, and therefore that is the malacha of beirer. So this is the final pshat of Abaye in this Braisa. Ruah Rabbanon kamei de Rove. The Rabbanon said this pshat of Abaye in front of Rove. Omar Lahu, and he responded, Shapir Omar Nachmeni. The pshat of Nachmeni, which refers to Abaye, his name, he was Rabbi Abaye, was called Nachmeni, is a good pshat, very good pshat in this Braisa. Now, if you go through this Gemara here, what we have is, there were the last three answers the Gemara gave, the Gemara never refuted the concept of the answer. And therefore in Shulchan Aruch, in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, this is the basic halacha, the basic rule that you always have to remember regarding beirer, that in order for beirer to be allowed on Shabbos, it's only when you have these three conditions. If it's being done by hand, if it's being done by removing the edible food from the pseiles, from what's not edible, and for the purpose of eating it immediately. When you have the combination of these three, then it's allowed. That's the pshat over here in this Gemara. That's the conclusion that we take out, halacha l'maisa b'negei to beirer. Otherwise, if one of these three conditions are missing, then it's not allowed. Let me mention another interesting thing regarding this detail, that it has to be oichel mitoch pseiles, removing the edible. So there's a shaila b'negei to a case where you have, for example, a bowl of soup, and a fly falls into the bowl of soup. What do you do now? How do you remove that fly in a permissible manner on Shabbos? So there are those that say that since removing food from the pseiles is not an issue, so if you take a spoon and you take out soup, and together with the soup you include the fly as well, so you're basically removing some soup from the soup in the bowl. So you're not just removing the fly alone, but you're removing the soup together with the fly. And that would be allowed. The Alter Rebbe, however, in the Siddur, Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, in Halachas, he has a Hilchas Rapsa Shabbos, says that this is not allowed. This would be Mamish Isser Skila Achiv Chatas, because the main reason why you're doing this is not for the soup that's in your spoon. You're only doing it to remove the fly. You're including some soup, but it's clear that you're doing it just to remove the fly. You're not planning on eating that soup that's in that spoon together with the fly. So the Alter Rebbe says that's not allowed. What's the Eitzah? The Alter Rebbe gives a different Eitzah. That if you pick up the entire bowl and you spill out directly from the bowl and the fly goes out along with the soup that you spill out, that's allowed. And the Alter Rebbe says you would even be allowed to blow the fly to the edges of the bowl and then easily be able to lift it and pour out the soup together with the fly that comes out automatically. Now, exactly the logic behind this point that the Alter Rebbe says, why this is allowed, is up for a discussion. This is explained in many different places, but lahalacha lamaisa, that's what the Alter Rebbe says would be allowed regarding removing the fly from the soup. Another detail the Alter Rebbe there says, in that place in the Siddur, to be machmer, is benigeh, for example, eating peanuts. When you remove the shell of the peanuts, then there's another thin, sort of reddish shell that is on the peanuts. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, even if you remove the shell, that would be allowed actually on Shabbos. But then separating and removing this thinner shell from the peanut would be biter, and that's an issue. The Alter Rebbe says it would also be an issue of muktzeh, and therefore the Alter Rebbe says you have to be machmer not to eat this on Shabbos. Let's continue the Gemara inside. The Gemara now brings the following statement: you had two foods in front of you. You selected for yourself or for someone else, to leave for someone else to eat. Rav Ashi Masni, Rav Ashi learned in a Braisa, potter. Rav Ashi learned that there's a case that you'd be potter. Potter meaning potter, but it's asam d'Rabbanan, not permitted. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti Masni Chayev. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti learned in a Braisa that you're selecting, you're doing the malacha of Beirer and Shabbos, you're Chayev. Now, reflect the Gemara, Rav Ashi Masni potter. When Rav Ashi learned in a Braisa that you're potter, what case is this? V'hatani Chayev. We learned before in the Braisa that we had, either there's a case where it's permitted, that's what the Braisa said, maniach beirer v'oichel beirer maniach, or in beirer chayiv chatos. So it's either one or the other, or chayiv chatos or mutter. What's the case that it would be potter? Answers the Gemara like kasha. This is not a question, as we already mentioned before in one of the answers. Ha bekinan v'tamchoy, in a case where you did beirer with a kinan and tamchoy, which is a vessel, but it's not the usual way, the way it's done, and therefore chachamim asered because it's being done with a vessel, not directly by hand, but it's not the usual vessel used, so it's not asam and atayra, it's not chayiv, and ha benafa v'kavra. When it's done with a sifter, with the vessel that's designated for this selecting, then, or this sifting, then it would be aser min hatayra. Ki aser Avdimi Amar. When Avdimi came, he said as follows: Shapse that Rav Bivi Havoi. It was a Shabbos that it was Rav Bivi's turn to serve the students. In the yeshiva they took turns of serving, and it was Rav Bivi's turn to serve. Viklu Rabami v'Rabasi. And Rabami, there were special guests. Rabami and Rabasi were there for Shabbos. Shada Kamayu Kalkola de Peri. He put in front of them a basket of fruits together with leaves and other things, together with the fruits. He didn't separate the good from the bad. He put it all out there in front of them to eat. And I wasn't sure is the reason why he did this is because his opinion was, Rav Bivi's opinion was, even to select the food, the edible from the inedible, is also forbidden. So he didn't want to select and take out the food, the fruits. Or he was doing this, he wanted to put everything out together, so it should be like a large basket with a lot of fruits and things in it. So he's serving ba'ayin yafa generously. Is that the reason? Chizkiya Omar. Chizkiya said another halacha regarding beirer. Ha-beirer tormisen mitoich pseiles shelehen. If someone is selecting the tormisen, which is kind of beans, from their pseiles, from their shell, chayiv, you're chayiv. So you're selecting, you're removing what's edible from the shell. You're chayiv. Lei mekasava chizkiya, shall we say chizkiya holds, oichel mitoich pseiles aser. Removing what's edible from what's not edible is also forbidden. Not like what we learned until now. The Gemara, no, not necessarily. Tormisen, these beans are different. Shani tormisen, the story with these beans is the sholkila shiva zimni. In order to make it edible, it's cooked 7 times. It's cooked very, very strongly. And therefore, what happens after it's cooked so many times, it gets very, very soft and watery. V'ilay shaklilei, if you don't remove it from its shell, if you don't remove it, misrach, it becomes ruined, it becomes spoiled because it's so watery and soft. So therefore, it's considered to be like something which is not edible. In its current state, leaving it where it is, in its current state, it's not edible. So when you remove the bean, so you're taking something that it's in its current state is not edible, would be spoiled where it is. So therefore, we consider it to be like removing a pseiles from the oichel, and it's not allowed. That's one pshat in the Gemara. Rashi has other pshatim, changes the gears in the Gemara. We'll leave it at this pshat in the Gemara for now. Now the Gemara moves on to the next malacha that it said in the Mishnah, which was teichen. Ve'hat teichen. If you are grinding, that's a malacha on Shabbos. Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa now mentions a few things that are going to be a tilde of teichen. Hai man de parim silke, chayev mishum teichen. If you're mincing beets, cutting it into very small pieces, that would be a tilde of teichen, similar to grinding. Amar Rav Menashe says, Hai man de solid silti. If you're cutting wood into small chips of pieces of wood, also chayiv mishum teichen. You're also going to be chayiv for grinding. In other words, grinding is not dafka when you're mamish grinding it into a powder, but even when you cut into very small pieces, you'd be chayiv for grinding as well. Amar Ravashi says, and if when you're cutting these little chips of wood, you're being careful to cut them down to a certain size, chayiv mishum mechatech. You would also be chayiv for cutting to size. If you cut down anything to a very specific size, then you're chayiv. You'd be chayiv twice here for teichen and for mechatech. Going to the next malachas in the Mishnah, v'halosh v'ha'oife, kneading and baking. Rav Papa said, Shavak Tane Didon Bishul Samemanim. The Tana of the Mishnah left the way it was done in the Mishkan, which is when they had to cook the spices to be used for the dyes in the Mishkan, the Havab Mishkan, that's the way it was done in the Mishkan. V'nakat oife. Instead, the Tana mentions baking, which l'chayra wasn't done in the Mishkan. What's the reason for this? Answers the Gemara. Tana didon sidura de pas nokat. The Tana of our Mishnah that uses oife instead of bishul, baking instead of cooking, is because the Tana goes through the process of preparing bread, starting from plowing, planting, and so on, until you have bread that you bake. That's the order that the Tana uses, and therefore he mentions oife. Amar Ravacha bar Avira said, Hai man deshodis sichse la asuna. If a person has wooden pegs that are very moist and he wants to dry them and harden them, he throws them into the oven. Chayiv mishum mevashal. He's chayiv for the malacha of mevashal, of cooking. Fragt the Gemara pshita, wouldn't this be obvious? Why even if it's not an edible, something that's edible, but he's taking this peg and he's cooking it. He's hardening it in the oven and cooking it. And for the Gemara, no. Ma'od teime, I would say, l'shruye manaka mechaven. He doesn't want to cook it. He's not trying to heat it. He just wants to harden it. Okay? But the process of cooking is not what he's interested in. Kamash melon. So therefore, what he's teaching us is the mir perafi. When you throw it into the oven, what happens is it first softens up. The liquid that's in it evaporates and it softens up first. And then v'hoda kamet, and then it gets hardened. So there is a process of cooking taking place, and you'll be chayiv as well. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Rabbi bar Avhunem said, Hai man da artoch kufre. If you heat up tar and it melts, chayiv mishum mevashal, you also chayiv for cooking on Shabbos. Pshite, fragt the Gemara, it's obvious. You're cooking it, you're melting it. Mao de temes, so says the Gemara, I would think to say, kivin the hoda ve'ikushe, since it will harden again, so the process of cooking that you accomplished here is temporary, and it hardens up again, it'll, like what happens with tar, Emeloi, I would say maybe such a kind of cooking that's just temporary is not chayiv for the malacha. Kamash malon, therefore he's teaching me that even in this case you are chayiv. Omar Rav said, Hai man the ovid chavite, a person that makes a barrel on Shabbos, makes a earthenware barrel from scratch. Chayiv mishum sheva chatois. There's going to be chayiv for 7 chatois. What are the 7 chatois? So Rashi here spells them out. You can take a look at Rashi. Rashi says the first would be teichen. He's taking pieces of earth and grinding them, softening them and grinding them to be used to make this barrel. The next one, it says bayre. Rashi says he has to select the pebbles that don't belong there to throw out those pebbles. And then the third one, Rashi says, would be sifting, merakid. He has to sift it. That he has only the fine earth that's going to be used for this. Then the next one is losh, megabalatit. He adds water in order to make the earth into pasty to be able to make this keli. The next one that Rashi says is mimareyach. When he smooths it, he shapes the barrel in the shape and smooths it. That's mimareyach, like when the malacha of smoothing the hide of the animal. Here he's smoothing it. The next one Rashi says is mavir. Mavir, when he has to kindle a fire in order to heat it up. And the next one, Rashi says, is mavashal, when he actually hardens it and cooks it, so to speak, or bakes it in the oven, and that's mavashal. Those are the 7 malachas. Okay, let's go back into the Gemara. Tanura, if he made an oven from scratch, chayiv mishum shmeina chatois, so be chayiv 8 chatois. What are the 8 chatois? So we're talking about making an earthenware oven. So the same 7 chatois that we just mentioned, but in the case of an oven, there's another layer of earth or some kind of other layer that's added as insulation to the oven to insulate the heat. And for this, Rashi says you'd be chayiv from makkeh b'patish. This is the final blow to make the oven useful, to be able to be used as an oven. So you're chayiv for an 8th one as well, for makkeh b'patish. Omar Abaya says, Haiman da ovet chalsa. If you make a basket made from reeds, chayiv achas esre chatois. You'd be chayiv 11 chatois. What are the 11 chatois? So Rashi here explains. You're cutting the reeds, and while you're cutting them, you're also pruning. You're instigating the growth of the other reeds there. So you'd be chayiv for 2, for reaping and for causing planting, for causing it to grow. Then you have to gather these reeds together. You're chayiv for ma'amer, for gathering. Then you have to select the good ones from the not good ones. So that's boider. So you're selecting the not good ones. That's boider. Then you have to smooth them out. That's memachek. Okay, as we mentioned before, smoothing it out. Then you have to slice them to thinner pieces, very thin slices. So then that will be like the malacha of teichen, grinding. Then you have to cut them down to size. That's machatech, when you cut the size. And then there are 3 malachas that are related to weaving, setting it up, and looping them, and then actually weaving. So then you chayiv for another 3, which are related to oirig. And then, after you're done weaving them together, and you have to make it all equal and nice, that it's that makkeh b'patish, the final blow where he makes it equal, that it should fit perfectly, that's makkeh b'patish. That's the 11th one, the final blow. Now the Gemara continues, back inside the Gemara, v'ichaite lepume, chayiv shloish esrei chatois. If you're making a seam on the top to tie it all together, and you have on the top edge of it, you put another layer over there to tie it all together. So then you're going to be chayiv for another 2 malachas, teifer. You're stitching it together on the top, and then you also have to tie together the stitches that it should remain there tight. So you chayiv for teifer and kosher. So together you have 13 chatois that he would be chayiv for making this on Shabbos. Going to the next case of the Mishnah, if you shear the wool of an animal and you whiten it, you clean it, you dry, you launder it, so you be chayiv for the two malachas. Amar Rabbi barav Chonem, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hatoivet semer she'al gabe beheme. If you are going to if you spin the wool on top of the body of the animal. Shabbos, on Shabbos, chayiv shalosh chatois, you're going to be chayiv for 3 chatois. Achas mishum goizes. So one is, we're talking about a person that spins it on the body of the animal, and then after that, he shears the wool, he cuts it off. So you chayiv for goizes, for shearing. V'achas mishum menapitz. He had to separate and comb it while it was on the animal. V'achas mishum teiva, and then for spinning it on the animal. Rav Kahana argues and says no. Ein derech gzize bekach. This is not the way it's usually the way you usually shear the hair of the wool from the animal. Ve'ein derech menapitz bekach. This is not the way it's usually combed. Ve'ein derech tivoi bekach. This is not the way it's usually spun. So therefore, you do a malacha shalei kedarka, you're not going to be chayiv. Asks the Gemara, let's go back to the Mishkan. How was this done in the Mishkan? V'loi, this is not the way it was done. But v'tanya mishmei de Rab Nechemya. We learned in the name of Rab Nechemya, Shotuf be'izim, v'tavu be'izim. They washed the wool of the animal while it was on the goats, and the hairs of the goats were washed on the goats. V'tavu be'izim, and they also spun the hair. They prepared it while it was still attached to the goats. Al mitvia al gabe behemish matvia. So I see this is the way the malacha was done in the Mishkan. So apparently this is the derech to do the malacha this way. Answers the Gemara, Chachme Yisei Rashani. There, it was a unique thing that these women did, that they had a special Chachme, that they knew how to do it while it was still on the animals. But this is not the regular way to do the malacha. Now, why did these women do it this way? What was the concept of showing a chachma to do it on the animals? The Rebbe has an arichas psicha about this in Chelik Tezayim, Parshas Vayakel, I believe it is, where there the Rebbe, one of the basic points the Rebbe says is they wanted to donate not just the detached the hair itself, which is now sort of a daimim to the Mishkan, but they wanted to bring it while it's on the animal itself, prepare it while it's on the animal itself, and bring a chai to be donated to the Mishkan. It's a higher level of a donation to the Mishkan. There's arichas over there in the Sikha, you can take a look inside. It's going to come up later in the Gemara on the Tzadik Test. Maybe we'll go through more details about this there. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Tan Rabbanon. The Rabbanon said as follows, Atoilish esakonov, if you pluck feathers from a bird, va'koitmai, and you clip off the top of the feather, which is soft to be used. It could be used for pillows, blankets, stuffing, whatever. Marta means you pull off the sides of the feather. There's the middle part of the feather, and then the sides, you pull it off to be used. So then chayv shalosh chatois. For doing these three things, you chayv 3 chatois. What are these three things? Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, toilish chayv mishum geizes. Plucking the feathers, you chayv for shearing. Kaitim chayv mishum bechatech. When you cut off the top, you're cutting it to a specific size, the thin part on the top. For that, you're chayv for cutting it down to a size. Memaret, when you pull out the sides of the feathers, chayiv mishum memachik, you're smoothing it out, you're pulling it out, and you chayiv for a third malacha memachik. Hakoisher v'hamater. The next two malachas we learned in the Mishnah is tying and untying. Kshire b'mishkan heichavoy. Where was there tying in the Mishkan? Amar Rave, says Rave, sheken kaishrim b'yisedes oyhalim. They would tie the yiriyos, the coverings of the Mishkan. They would come down to the sides of the walls of the Mishkan. They would tie it down to pegs or nails that were in the ground. And in order for not to fly up in the wind, they would tie it down to the pegs in the ground. And frakte Gemara barahu kaisher al manas lahaturu. That's being tied with the intention to untie it. It's not a kesher shal kayama, as we'll see later in the sugya, which discusses the malacha of kaisher. Kaisher you only chayav for if it's a kesher shal kayama, a double knot and a kesher that you're planning on leaving there. Over here, though, they're tying it with the plan on untying it when they have to travel further. Elam Rabaya, rather Rabaya says, "Shekin erge yiriyos, the ones that were weaving, the yiriyos shenifseka lehanima." If there is a piece, a strand that snapped, kaisher maisa, they would tie it back together. Not going to throw out the whole thing. They would tie it back together if there's any thread that snapped. Amalei Rave, so Rave said, Tiratz the kaisher. Okay, very good. You answered where we find kaisher in the Mishkan. Mater ma'ikalamema. Where do we find that they had a need to untie anything in the Mishkan? If you're going to say the pshat is, the place you find it in the Mishkan is, the misrami lei Trei kitri. The Bach takes out the word chuti. So if it happened that there were two threads that snapped, and they had to make two knots, and these two knots were bahadi adadi, right near each other, so it doesn't look nice. It's not a nice smooth material. You have two knots that are right near each other. So sharichad, they would untie one knot, v'katachad, and they would leave one tied. So that's when they had to untie when it happened to be that there were two knots right near each other. So they ended up untying one. Says the Gemara, no, it can't be. Preparing something for a king of flesh and blood. You wouldn't prepare it this way. It's not beautiful. Preparing the yiriyos for the Eibishter and the Mishkan, for sure it wasn't done this way. It creates this gap in the yiriyos if you untie a thread. Elamar Rave, so rather Rave says, V'temer Rabiloi shekain tzeidei. When they had to capture the chilazon fish, which was used to get the dye of tcheles, as we know, a special chilazon that they had to capture. So they had ropes that they used as a net to capture them. So usually they had these ropes that were tied b'kesher shel kayama to capture them. But sometimes you have to untie one rope and attach to another rope. And in such a case, it's matir, and this is where the matir, they had to untie in order to be able to capture the chalazah, and that's where we find this malacha in the Mishkan.